A bear brings a golden key to a stranger. What it opens will shock the world. The forest was a cathedral of shadows, its towering trees swaying under the weight of the howling wind. The night carried an eerie silence, interrupted only by the soft crunch of frost beneath boots. Sarah, a young environmental researcher, tightened her grip on her flashlight. It wasn't just the cold making her tremble. She had seen something impossible. Hours earlier, her team had vanished without a trace during a routine study deep within the Rocky Mountains. A sudden blizzard had forced them to scatter, and now she was alone, her radio crackling with static. Her breath clouded in the frigid air as she whispered, "Where are you, Ben? Please." But only the forest replied, its creaks and groans echoing like warnings. Then it happened. A low, guttural growl resonated through the trees, freezing her in place. She spun around, her flashlight shaking in her hands. The beam landed on a pair of glowing amber eyes peering from the darkness. They weren't human. Slowly, the figure emerged, a massive grizzly bear. Its fur shimmered under the moonlight, wet with melting snow. In its jaws, it held something small and glinting. A golden key. Sarah's heart raced. She stepped back, nearly slipping on the icy ground. The bear dropped the key with a soft clink and stared at her. Its gaze was intense but calm, as if it were trying to communicate. Before she could scream or run, the bear did something she couldn't believe. It nudged the key toward her with its enormous paw. Her flashlight flickered, the battery struggling against the cold. What do you want?" she whispered, her voice breaking. The bear remained still, its breath visible in the frosty air. Slowly, almost reluctantly, Sarah knelt and picked up the key. It was heavier than she'd expected, its surface etched with intricate symbols that seemed ancient, almost otherworldly. Before she could examine it further, the bear turned and began walking into the forest, pausing only to glance back at her. It wanted her to follow. Every instinct screamed for her to stay put, to run back to the safety of the base camp, but curiosity gripped her like a vice. What could a bear want with her? And why this key? With one last glance at the path she'd come from, Sarah made her choice. She followed the bear into the abyss of the unknown. As she trudged deeper into the forest, Sarah noticed strange carvings on the trees, glowing faintly in the moonlight. The symbols mirrored those on the key. The air grew heavier, as though the forest itself was alive, watching. Suddenly the bear stopped at the edge of a clearing. In the center stood a massive stone archway, covered in moss and illuminated by a strange golden light emanating from within. Her breath caught in her throat. She tightened her grip on the key, feeling its cold metal bite into her palm. The bear turned to her one last time, its amber eyes gleaming with an unspoken command. It was time to uncover the truth. Sarah's steps faltered as she crossed into the clearing, her boots crunching against the snow-covered ground. The stone archway loomed before her, impossibly ancient and emanating an otherworldly hum. The golden light pulsed gently, almost as if it were alive. She could feel it vibrating in her chest, resonating with something deep within her. The bear stood motionless beside her, its enormous presence both comforting and intimidating. Sarah looked down at the golden key in her hand. The intricate carvings shimmered faintly in the archway's glow. Her fingers trembled as she reached out to touch the stone. It was warm, impossibly warm in the biting cold of the mountain forest. Before she could fully comprehend what she was doing, a low rumble echoed from within the archway. Snow cascaded from the surrounding trees as the ground shook violently. Sarah stumbled, clutching at the bear's fur for balance. The grizzly didn't flinch. Instead, it stepped forward, its gaze fixed on the glowing portal that now swirled within the archway. "What is this?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible over the vibrating hum. The key in her hand began to grow warmer, its light intensifying. She stared at it, her breath quickening. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to turn back, to escape whatever lay ahead. But the bear nudged her forward with its massive head, urging her to continue. As Sarah stepped closer, the light within the archway shifted, revealing glimpses of a world unlike anything she had ever seen. Towering crystalline structures pierced the sky, their surfaces reflecting colors that didn't exist in her world. A vast forest of glowing trees spread out beneath them, their roots weaving into rivers of liquid light. Her heart pounded. "This can't be real," she muttered. The bear growled softly, its eyes fixed on her. Sarah understood. She had a choice to make: step through the portal into the unknown, or retreat to the safety of her familiar world. Her fingers tightened around the key. She took a deep breath, then stepped forward. The moment she crossed the threshold, a searing heat enveloped her. She cried out, shielding her eyes as the world around her dissolved into a kaleidoscope of light and sound. Her body felt weightless, as if she were being carried by an invisible current. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the sensation stopped. She landed hard on the ground, gasping for air. The light had faded, replaced by a dim, ethereal glow. She was no longer in the forest. Around her stretched an endless expanse of crystalline terrain. The air was thick with an unearthly energy, and the faint sound of something humming in the distance made her hair stand on end. The bear was beside her, its fur glistening in the strange light. It glanced at her, then began walking toward a distant structure, a towering spire of crystal that seemed to pierce the sky. Sarah hesitated, but the key in her hand pulsed gently, as if guiding her forward. As they approached the spire, the terrain grew more surreal. Strange, glowing plants pulsed with rhythmic light, and the air smelled faintly of ozone. Sarah stumbled over uneven ground, her exhaustion mounting with every step. But the bear remained steadfast, its calm presence keeping her grounded. When they reached the base of the spire, Sarah realized it wasn't just a structure, it was alive. The crystal surface shimmered with a faint heartbeat, and symbols, identical to those on the key, etched themselves across its surface. The bear stopped and turned to her, its eyes conveying an urgency she couldn't ignore. She stepped forward and raised the key. The moment it touched the crystal, a deep, resonant tone echoed across the landscape. The spire's surface began to shift, the symbols glowing brighter as they rearranged themselves into a doorway. Suddenly, a deafening roar shattered the silence. Sarah spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. From the horizon, a massive shadow moved toward them. It was a creature unlike anything she had ever seen, a hulking, serpentine beast with glowing scales and eyes that burned like fire. The bear growled, positioning itself between Sarah and the approaching creature. She backed away, clutching the key tightly. The doorway was still forming, its light intensifying with every passing second. But the beast was closing in fast, its roar shaking the ground beneath their feet. Come on," Sarah pleaded, her voice trembling. The bear roared back at the beast, its ferocity unmatched. For a brief moment, Sarah thought it might charge, but instead it turned and nudged her toward the glowing doorway. It wanted her to go without it. "No," she shouted, tears streaming down her face. "I'm not leaving you." The bear growled again, more forcefully this time. It stared at her, its amber eyes filled with an emotion she couldn't quite describe. Then, with one final roar, it charged at the beast, its massive form colliding with the creature in a thunderous impact. The doorway behind her flared brightly. Sarah hesitated, torn between saving the bear and escaping to safety, but the key pulsed again, urging her forward. With a cry of anguish, she stepped through the doorway, the light swallowing her whole. Sarah stumbled as she emerged from the glowing doorway, the world around her shifting into focus. She found herself in a vast meadow under a twilight sky. The air was warm and heavy, carrying the scent of unfamiliar flowers. In the distance, a glimmering river snaked its way toward a towering city of light. But something was wrong. The ground beneath her feet trembled, and the faint sound of footsteps echoed behind her. She turned, her breath catching in her throat. It wasn't the serpent from before, but something else entirely. A group of humanoid figures approached, their forms shimmering like liquid silver. Their eyes glowed faintly, and though they walked upright, their movements were unnervingly fluid. Sarah clutched the golden key, unsure whether to flee or confront them. Before she could decide, a deep growl rumbled nearby. She spun around, hope surging in her chest. The bear had returned, or so she thought. Emerging from the shadows was not the grizzly, but another creature entirely. It was larger, with fur that glimmered like starlight and eyes that burned with an intensity that made her heart race. This creature exuded both power and serenity, its very presence commanding attention. The silver figures stopped abruptly, their glowing eyes fixed on the creature. They exchanged a series of low, melodic hums that sounded almost like a language. Then, without warning, they turned and vanished into the mist. The star bear, if that's what it was, lowered its head, its gaze meeting Sarah's. There was an intelligence in its eyes, a knowing that both comforted and unsettled her. Slowly, it padded toward her, its steps soundless despite its immense size. Sarah held her breath. "Who or what are you?" she whispered. The creature didn't respond, at least not verbally. Instead, it lowered its head and nudged her hand. With its massive snout, the golden key pulsed in response, its light flickering in sync with the bear's breathing. Sarah's fingers tightened around the key as a strange sensation washed over her, an overwhelming sense of connection, as though the creature could see her thoughts and feel her emotions. "You're here to help me," she said, the words coming. Unbidden, the creature's solemn gaze was her only answer. With a low rumble, the star bear turned and began walking toward the distant city of light. Sarah hesitated, glancing back at the doorway she had come through. It had faded, leaving nothing but empty air behind. There was no going back. Steeling herself, she followed the bear. As they traversed the strange landscape, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The meadow was alive with peculiar creatures, small, luminescent beings that darted between the flowers, their bodies emitting soft musical notes. The sky shifted colors, from deep purple to vibrant orange, as though the world itself was breathing. The star bear moved with purpose, its every step deliberate. Sarah struggled to keep up, her legs aching from the trek. Yet, despite her exhaustion, she couldn't bring herself to stop. There was something about the bear, something that made her trust it implicitly. At one point, they came across a chasm, its depths obscured by a swirling mist. A narrow bridge of crystal spanned the gap, its surface slick and treacherous. Sarah hesitated, fear knotting. Her stomach, "I can't cross that," she said, her voice trembling. The bear turned to her, its gaze steady. It stepped onto the bridge, its massive paws moving with a grace that seemed impossible for its size. It crossed halfway before stopping. Looking back at her expectantly, Sarah took a deep breath. "If I fall, this is your fault," she muttered, more to herself than to the bear. She stepped onto the bridge, her heart pounding with every step. The crystal surface was cold and smooth, and the swirling mist below made her dizzy, but the bear's steady presence ahead gave her the courage to continue. When she finally reached the other side, she collapsed to her knees, her chest heaving. The bear waited patiently, its gaze unwavering. "Thanks," she muttered, though she wasn't sure whether the bear could understand her. Somehow, she felt that it did. Hours passed, or perhaps it was days. Time seemed to blur in this strange world. Finally, they reached the outskirts of the City of Light. The towering structures she had seen from afar were even more magnificent. Up close, their surfaces shimmering like liquid gold. The air hummed with energy, and Sarah could feel the golden key growing warmer in her hand. The Star Bear stopped at the city's entrance, a massive archway carved from what looked like solid light. It nudged her forward, its amber eyes filled with urgency. Sarah hesitated. She didn't know what lay beyond the archway, but she had come too far to turn back now. Taking a deep breath, she stepped through the archway. As Sarah stepped through the archway, the world transformed around her. The City of Light wasn't just a collection of shimmering structures, it was alive. The buildings pulsed with a faint rhythm, like a heartbeat. Strange, translucent beings glided through the streets, their forms shifting like liquid light. They seemed unaware of Sarah, moving with an ethereal grace as if she were invisible. The Star Bear followed close behind, its immense presence a comfort in the surreal environment. The golden key in her hand pulsed in harmony with the city's rhythm, growing warmer with each step she took. "What is this place?" she whispered, her voice trembling with awe and trepidation. The bear nudged her gently, urging her forward. Its gaze swept the surroundings, as though searching for something or someone. Sarah's heart raced. She didn't belong here, and she knew it. Yet the key in her hand seemed to pull her deeper into the city, guiding her through its labyrinthine streets. As she walked, she noticed carvings etched into the walls of the glowing buildings, scenes of creatures and humans working together, building, creating, and fighting side by side. The key led her to a grand plaza, its center dominated by a towering obelisk of pure light. As Sarah approached, the golden key grew almost too hot to hold, its light bright enough to make her squint. She stopped at the base of the obelisk, her breathing shallow. Suddenly, the ground beneath her feet shifted. The plaza seemed to dissolve, leaving her standing on a narrow platform suspended in a void of swirling light. A voice echoed around her, deep and resonant, yet strangely comforting. "Only those with courage may proceed." Sarah glanced at the bear, but it had remained on the edge of the void, watching her with an intensity that made her stomach churn. She was on her own. The platform began to shift, moving beneath her like a conveyor belt. She stumbled, barely keeping her balance. Ahead, the path split into multiple branches, each leading toward a glowing doorway. The voice returned. "Choose wisely." Sweat trickled down Sarah's brow as she studied the doorways. Each shimmered with a different color, gold, silver, and crimson. There was no time to deliberate. The platform beneath her was moving faster, and she had only seconds to decide. Instinctively, she chose the golden doorway, leaping toward it just as the platform tilted. She tumbled through the threshold, her heart pounding in her ears. On the other side of the doorway, Sarah found herself in a vast chamber filled with floating orbs of light. Each orb seemed to hold a memory, a fleeting glimpse of someone's life. She reached out to touch one, but the moment her fingers brushed its surface, a shock of electricity coursed through her hand. The voice echoed, "Again, memories are sacred. To take what is not yours is to face the consequences." The room began to shift, the orbs spinning faster and faster until they formed a vortex around her. Sarah cried out, shielding her face with her arms. "What do you want from me?" she shouted, her voice barely audible over the roar of the spinning orbs. The voice didn't answer, but the vortex slowed, leaving one orb hovering directly in front of her. Its light was dimmer than the others, almost flickering. Tentatively, she reached out, this time without resistance. As her fingers touched the orb, a vision unfolded before her eyes. She saw a great battle between humans and creatures, their forces clashing beneath a darkened sky. In the midst of the chaos, a bear, her bear, stood protectively over a small child holding a golden key. The vision shifted, showing the bear leading the child to safety, much like it had done for Sarah. But before the vision could reveal more, the orb shattered, its fragments dissolving into the air. The chamber faded, and Sarah found herself back in the plaza, the obelisk towering over her once more. The star bear stood nearby, watching her with an expression that seemed almost proud. "You've done this before," Sarah murmured, realizing the truth. The bear had guided others like her, perhaps for centuries. But why? And to what end? The bear lowered its massive head, pressing its snout against her hand. For a moment, Sarah felt a rush of warmth and understanding, as though the bear was sharing its own memories with her. She saw flashes of its past, of battles fought, lives saved, and sacrifices made. She saw the weight of its duty, the loneliness of its existence, and its unwavering determination to protect those entrusted to it. Tears filled her eyes. "You've carried this burden for so long," she whispered. "But why me? What makes me special?" The bear didn't answer, but it didn't need to. Sarah knew the answer lay ahead, in the heart of the city. The golden key pulsed again, pulling Sarah toward the obelisk. As she approached, a doorway appeared at its base, glowing with the same golden light as the key. The bear hesitated, its massive frame blocking her path. "Are you coming with me?" she asked, her voice barely above. A whisper. The bear gazed at her for a long moment before stepping aside. It let out a low rumble, a sound that Sarah interpreted as both encouragement and farewell. Taking a deep breath, she stepped through the doorway. Inside, she found herself in a small circular chamber. At its center stood a pedestal, atop which rested a second key, larger and more ornate than the one she held. As Sarah approached, she noticed an inscription carved into the pedestal. The words glowed faintly, written in a language she didn't recognize, but somehow understood. "Only through sacrifice can the world be saved." Her hands trembled as she reached for the key. The moment her fingers touched it, the room erupted in light. A flood of images and emotions washed over her, visions of a world in peril, of creatures and humans united against a common enemy, and of the golden key unlocking a future where coexistence was possible. But there was a cost. To take the second key would mean giving up something precious, her freedom, her memories, or perhaps even her life. The choice was hers. The golden light engulfing the chamber felt heavy, pressing against Sarah like an invisible force. Her pulse quickened as she read the inscription again. "Only through sacrifice can the world be saved." The ornate key shimmered on the pedestal, its intricate carvings glowing faintly. Its beauty was mesmerizing, but the weight of its meaning loomed over her. Sarah's hands hovered above it, trembling. "What does it mean? What sacrifice?" she asked aloud, her voice echoing in the chamber. The star bear appeared in the doorway, its massive frame radiating calm and strength. Its glowing eyes seemed to hold the answers, but they offered no guidance, only a silent plea for her to decide. The chamber seemed to respond to her hesitation. The glowing walls dimmed, and a chilling wind swept through the room. Shadows writhed in the corners, and a low, menacing growl echoed from somewhere unseen. "Time is running out," the voice from earlier warned. Sarah's mind raced. She thought of the visions she'd seen, the battles, the bond between humans and creatures, and the bear standing steadfast through centuries of conflict. "This isn't just about me," she realized. "This is about everyone, about the future." As if responding to her realization, the pedestal began to glow brighter. Suddenly, the room around her transformed. She was no longer in the chamber, but standing on a battlefield under a darkened sky. Creatures of all shapes and sizes fought alongside humans against a shadowy, monstrous force. The scene was chaos, flashes of light from magical weapons, roars, and cries of desperation, and the heavy thud of creatures falling in battle. At the center of it all stood the star bear, its fur streaked with blood, and its eyes burning with determination. The bear was protecting something, a small glowing orb cradled in its massive paws. Sarah's heart lurched as she recognized it. The same orb she'd seen in the vortex of memories. Suddenly, the battlefield froze, and a figure emerged from the shadows. A tall, cloaked being with eyes like burning coals. It stared directly at Sarah, its voice echoing in her mind. "You hold the key to this war's end," it hissed. "But every key comes with a cost." The battlefield dissolved, and Sarah was back in the chamber. She looked down at the key in her hand, its golden glow pulsing in time with her racing heart. "What happens if I take the key?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear creeping into her chest. The voice answered, deep and resonant. "To take the key is to give. You will lose what you hold most dear." Sarah froze. The weight of the words settled on her like a stone. What did she hold most dear? Her memories, her family, her life. Tears welled in her eyes as she glanced at the star bear. It had sacrificed everything for this moment, for her to be here, to make this choice. "Why me?" she whispered. The bear stepped forward, its glowing eyes softening. It nudged her gently with its massive head, as if to say, "Because you are worthy." Taking a deep breath, Sarah made her decision. She reached for the key on the pedestal. The moment her fingers closed around it, a searing pain shot through her body, and the chamber was consumed by blinding light. Visions flashed before her eyes, her childhood, her family, the life she had left behind. Each memory burned brightly before fading into darkness. She felt them slipping away one by one, leaving a hollow ache in their place. But as the pain subsided, a new sensation emerged, a warmth like sunlight breaking through a storm. Sarah opened her eyes to find the chamber glowing with golden light, and in her hand the ornate key pulsed with a steady, reassuring rhythm. Sitkufer, Starbear, stood before her, its eyes filled with something she hadn't seen before, pride. "You have chosen well," the voice said. The doorway behind Sarah opened, revealing the city of light once more. But it was no longer serene. Dark shadows loomed over the glowing buildings, and the translucent beings she had seen earlier were now huddled together, their forms flickering like dying flames. The star bear let out a thunderous roar, and the shadows recoiled. Sarah gripped the ornate key tightly, feeling its power coursing through her. Together, she and the bear stepped into the city. The shadows surged forward, but the key's light blazed brightly, cutting through the darkness. Sarah raised the key above her head, and a beam of golden light shot into the sky, shattering the oppressive clouds and illuminating the city. The shadows screeched and writhed before dissolving into nothingness. The city's light grew stronger, and the translucent beings began to shine brightly once more. As the last of the shadows disappeared, the city transformed. The glowing buildings shifted, forming a massive symbol in the center of the plaza, a tribute to the star bear and its centuries of guardianship. The bear stood beside Sarah, its massive frame radiating an almost celestial glow. It gazed at her, with a look of deep gratitude before stepping forward, its form dissolving into starlight. The light swirled around Sarah, and she felt a profound connection to the bear's essence, as if it had become a part of her. "You are now the keeper of the key," the voice said. "Guard it well, for the world's future depends on you." The city of light faded, and Sarah found herself back in the forest, where her journey had begun. The golden key rested in her hand, its glow softer now but no less powerful. She looked around, expecting to see the star bear, but the forest was silent. The bond they had shared lingered in her heart, a constant reminder of their journey. As she walked back toward the village, Sarah felt a newfound strength within her. She didn't know what challenges lay ahead, but she knew she wasn't alone. The star bear's legacy lived on in her, and she was ready to face whatever came next. And as she disappeared into the trees, a single star appeared in the sky above, glowing brighter than all the rest, a silent testament to the bond between a girl and a bear, and the key that changed the world.